Welcome to the Policy Circle Move the Needle event on combating human trafficking. We are launching our brand new Policy Circle brief on human trafficking. And to do that, we invited Heather Fischer, who is a special advisor to the White House Domestic Policy Council on combating human trafficking. So I'll be interviewing Heather. But before that, to get us started, I invited Shelley Slater to join us. Shelley works in Dallas and is on the board of New Friends, New Life, a local organization combating human trafficking there. Shelley, you read the brief. What did you learn?
So I learned so much from the brief. I was almost a little bit alarmed, frankly, because I was a former news anchor here and I thought I was in the know, and I'm on a board for human trafficking. But the brief just had so many layers to it, from federal to state to local, to really explain the root of the cause, the root of the problem, and then how it can be a solution. So I really enjoyed that. I would also, as I've never gotten to be part of one of these Policy Circle events, I would love to hear from the folks that are out there. If you could chat in, I'm curious, where are you in the world? Could you chat in where you are in the world? I'd also love to know if there's anything about human trafficking that you specifically want to hear. It took me a solid 20 years to find this topic and realize that it was out there. It seems very hidden and protected, and yet it's one of the biggest businesses around. Okay, St. Louis, I went to school in Mizzou. I love my Missouri people. Fort Wayne, Dallas, Janesville, Fort Wayne again, Chicago area, Central New Jersey. I love that you guys are from all over the place. Tuning in from Montgomery, Alabama. Welcome, Mindy Ruckman. Okay, we're so happy to have you guys here. So I wanted to share with you one of the things that when I heard about human trafficking, pardon me, Sylvia, I just really couldn't wrap my hands around it. It felt like an invisible something. Here in Dallas, there are 400 women and children on the streets that get trafficked every single night. That's the statistic around here. And Texas is the second worst in the country when it comes to human trafficking. And yet I'd never seen it. I'd never heard of it. I couldn't quite wrap my head around it. So I want to show you a quick little video here of my experience when I literally went driving around Dallas.
Should I go right?
Yeah, okay. Turn here.
My son's lacrosse practices are all right here.
Oh, that's it right there.
Oh my gosh, I did hear about this. I recognize the building. There were more than a dozen women in here, but it just looks like your everyday warehouse or office.
This is a high traffic area.
This was right on the highway. This is not hidden. Hello, I-35.
Yeah. Looks like we're here.
But it doesn't, something's off here. I don't think that's right. Let's check the text.
Okay.
So is it 4300 block or 3400 block? Which one is it?
It says 4300.
Okay, we're here. And we're right next to my kid's school. We're 0.8 miles.
So when I found out that we were 0.8 miles, we literally had a list of locations, and I thought I was going to go to a certain part of town or a certain area where there's a lot of crime. But now I know that human trafficking knows no boundaries. It knows no one specific socioeconomic group. It's everywhere, and it's something we have to combat. So I would like to ask all of you guys a quick question. I'm going to start a poll here. This is the number that also pained me so much to hear. What age do you think is the average age of a child who is trafficked in this commercial sex trade? How old is that child? We're going to give you a good 20, 30 seconds to chime in here as I can see the results coming in. We've got about 5 more people to vote here. This is what grabbed me the most. Okay, so we have 42% of you here. Let's give you the results here. So 42% of you are saying 8 to 11 years old. That is not correct. It's 11 to 14. So 32% of you are correct. The age that they say people really kind of zero in on is that 13-year-old age. And so one of the things that I went and did after I heard that 13-year-old number is I went and found pictures of myself at 13 and tried to figure out where was I when I was just 13 years old. And that, frankly, was incredibly disturbing. So I want to talk to you just about what is human trafficking. That word, like, what does that even mean? So let's go ahead and pull up the definition of that. So human trafficking is by definition, oops, excuse me, I'm putting my video back up, is a crime that involves exploiting a person for labor, services, or commercial sex. And the thing that brought me, and I'm so grateful to be here, thank you to Sylvie, is this. What I learned about the policy circle, I was trying to unpack that word policy and make it make sense for me in my life. And really, as you talk to Sylvie more and more, it really is just about community. What do you care about in your community? I've got 3 boys. I care about education. I'm in my co-working space. I care about growing my business, and I do care about stopping human trafficking. And I think when you can circle up, you can get around women. And Sylvie, you bring so many women together. Tell me a little bit more about how you decided to write this specific brief. There are so many issues out in the world. Why human trafficking? Why this brief?
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you, Shelley. And thank you for that introduction and bringing it to life really in Dallas. You know, like the policy circle is really a simple way for each of us to have real conversations. And we had several members and supporters of the policy circle who said, you know, human trafficking is an issue that I really care about. And I'm already involved, but I want to understand better how policy at every level of government intersect and how it all works so I can make a difference and have a bigger impact. So that's when we started. We're like, okay, I personally was not fully aware. It was not on my radar. I knew about it, always thought this is really an international issue. And as we were researching it, talking to people, understanding local organizations, you just realize how many layers there are and how much coordination is required from the community, from business, from local law enforcement, to all the way up to US Marshals, federal, the Secretary of State, et cetera. And that's why we thought, well, to launch this brief that highlights this topic, it'd be great to really talk to Heather. So that it really came from our members asking us to explore and provide a brief, 360 overview of an issue that really is close to their heart.
I love that. And I think one of the things when I see the word circle up, that's what we're doing right now to better understand this. But I think if we could also, I have one other video that I was hoping to share with everybody, Sylvie. And it's,
yeah, we have the other video that I'd love to share. Yes.
Yeah, and it really shows
directly from women who have been trafficked. It's a powerful video, and I think everyone will appreciate it.
I was in a hotel room for months and months and months, and I was there to be kept. I was there to be beckoned for whenever he was ready for me. And the weird thing is I was okay with that. My abuse from my father started at 4. I was pregnant at 11 before I even had my cycle. So what's one more person? If it'll keep me safe, and that's all I ever wanted, then I was ready to endure.
I was trafficked for 7 years. I, in that time, became a mother.
There was a lot of drugs and alcohol, and I was just tired.
I knew being called names and having someone try to kill me was not good, and I shouldn't bring my son up in that environment. And it was an act of God that essentially freed me from that situation, and I was able to escape and take my son with me.
Yeah, and as you think about this industry, I pulled some of the numbers from the brief, Sylvie. And so if we're at $150 billion for this human trafficking industry, that's on the left there. If you look on the right, if you think about one of the biggest businesses out there, right, you think Amazon. Well, Amazon in 2019 made $12 billion. This industry in 2019 made $150 billion, which tells you how big it is.
Yeah. It's $22,000 per human traffic that brings into revenue. So
it's so disgusting that we even put numbers like that on people. But Sylvie, the concern, especially now during COVID, is that kids, and I'm very in tune with this with my children right now, they're online 9 hours per day. And this honestly is a statistic that's on the lower end because we're trying to be conservative in the numbers we're sharing here. 9 hours a day, whether it's through Nintendo, et cetera, where any kind of internet access. And so trafficking, it starts here, doesn't it, Sylvie?
Yeah, it really does. And, you know, a big part of the, it starts here. And also, there's a big part, I think the brief highlights kind of a 3P paradigm to fight trafficking. And one is prevention, which comes with education. And this is where it's so important today that every one of us are really aware of this issue, because our kids, anyone really is exposed to this, especially when people are going through economic hardship. And it's happening locally. The United States is not only a destination from around the world, but also a source of humans being trafficked. And there's more and more being done, and it's happening in every 50 states, and it requires so much coordination. So I think that's where it's important to talk about it today, especially I think as we are hearing a lot of conversations and abrupt reallocation or defunding of law enforcement. This is an issue where actually it requires training, it requires data, it requires just a lot. So I'm really thrilled to have Heather here to discuss this further. You know, I just wanted to say that in January, it is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and I had the privilege to be at the White House for the signing of an executive order creating Heather's role as special advisor to the White House as part of the Domestic Policy Council to combat trafficking. So Heather is newly appointed to her role, so it's a really an honor to have you here to learn more about your role and what each of us can do. I'd just like to perhaps highlight, you know, Heather, where you came from and your background. You were part of the McCain Institute on Leadership, and you played a key role there. You implemented a national prevention action plan in partnership with all levels of government, nonprofit stakeholders, state, federal. You worked in New York, in the regional capital, in the capital, but also you worked on Native Indian reservations to combat trafficking there, where it's really prevalent. So welcome, and thank you so much for joining us, Heather.
Oh, Sylvie, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much for hosting your folks here together today. I'm really excited. I've been a huge admirer of the Policy Circle. So thank you for elevating such an important topic, and so grateful to tune in today. And Shelley, thanks for teeing us up. You did a great job as well. Really grateful for your role there in Dallas, Texas. But yes, you're exactly right. The president created this position here at the White House in January, and I get to be the first to assume this role. And really what I am doing here since I came into the White House is to coordinate across the White House components just on the topic of human trafficking. So I get to work with all the folks here and think strategically about what else we could be doing to advance the president's work on this issue, the administration's work, and of course the federal agencies. Of those, 22 sit on our president's interagency task force, and those folks are working daily to ensure that we have a full all-of-government approach to combating human trafficking. Additionally, we have a role over at State Department. Ambassador John Cotton Richmond, he serves as our Senior Policy Operating Group Chair. So we have the cabinet level focused on this, and then we have folks on the Senior Policy Operating Group who make this thing go round. And I have the great pleasure from the White House of helping coordinate those efforts. And of course, I have the great privilege of advising the president and Advisor Trump, amongst other principals here, on all things related to trafficking in person. So thank you so much for sharing my background and my vocation in the space. This is my 10th year working on human trafficking. It's a huge privilege. I can't think of anything better than to be here at the White House, being able to fully focus on human trafficking in the highest office. So I'm still daily pinching myself that I have this opportunity, And I have rolled up my sleeves and have gotten to work, and we are focusing on all the P's, as we say: prevention, prosecution, protection, and of course, partnership. And that's where you all.
Yeah, that's right. And one thing that I've learned in the brief is how much coordination is required between Human Health Services as well as the DOJ, the Justice Department, to prosecute. There's one piece about preventing trafficking and protecting the victims, but then there's the prosecution piece that's so important. So it requires this coordination across like 15 agencies and as well as law enforcement locally. I think so it's also really an international issue and not just local issue. So it'd be great for you to talk about, the misconceptions around human trafficking and, right now that you're seeing, perhaps around your colleagues, but also in all through the decades of work in this field.
Yeah, thanks so much for that opportunity, because we do face a lot of common myths. First of all, one I would say right off the bat is that this is an overseas problem. And Sylvia, I have to tell you, I myself thought that way for a very long time. In fact, I knew about human trafficking for 10 years before I got an opportunity to enter into this field. And I knew, because I was hearing from NGO partners and governmental partners overseas, that children were being bought and sold in brothels. And at the time, I felt like that is a really dark issue. And once I recognized that it was happening overseas, I wanted to know more. Just like your audience here, I tried to sink my teeth into anything that I could find about the issue. I took trips overseas. I did see firsthand where there were children being bought and sold in brothels. But what I didn't recognize living in New York was that Westerners were taking trips overseas to purchase children. And as a woman, as a mom, as just a citizen from a community-based level, I realized this is not just an overseas problem. We're fueling this work internationally. So that's really how I got my start. And I sat down with a group of women in my Bible study group and in my book club and said, did you know that this is happening? Because I did not know. I felt like it was the best kept secret. And we just set to work to figure out what we could do to raise awareness about it and what I had to bring to the table. And so that really was my foray into the space. But then it wasn't long after, maybe 2 years, where the FBI came and asked me to join the first human trafficking task force. And to be honest with you, I told them at first they had the wrong girl. I just said, I'm not law enforcement. And they said, okay, but Heather, you know something about human trafficking. And I said, well, that's an international space. But what I realized is that we had some international best practices that we could bring here stateside. And that's really where I was able to go to the community-based work in the capital region and say, how do I reach my community so that they know this is something that is also happening here? Children who were born and raised in our communities.
So, and then it's, maybe we can also talk about what are, in your role today, or, actually, let's talk about a little bit more about how you ended up in the White House and your experience, with the Policy Circle, developing leaders who tackle really tough issues. They're not just planners of just events and to-do lists, but really tackling this topic. So you decided you were very strategic in your thinking, and how did you decide to go kind of upstream and to really combat the root causes of this? Tell us a little bit of what was your journey in combating human trafficking.
Honestly, I had a lot of learning to do. I was cognizant that there was a lot of folks who had spent some significant time in this space, and then I needed to take a pause and learn from them. And honestly, I spent probably 2 years on the task force just serving before I started really engaging, contributing to the conversation. And so I think we react to this issue, and rightfully so. I mean, this is an emergency, but it also deserves a thoughtful response. And so I had to pause and learn and listen. And I'm so appreciative that you showed some of the survivor videos because I have learned so much from the voice of survivors about how this work should be done. And I know my colleagues in this space will say the same thing, because in the early years of the trafficking persons work, we were well-intentioned, right? But we didn't have sort of the tenure under our belt like other movements. And so we've had to do a couple of things to be strategic. We've had to borrow from theory of change and research and evidence-based framework from other movements. So domestic violence is one. And then to build the human trafficking work on top of that. And also, you know, it's not the same, so we have to make some adjustments, but then we have to continually monitor and evaluate and make sure that what we are doing is actually serving survivors well. And I was really fortunate that I cut my teeth with an organization called Love 146. They are one of the premier service providers internationally and domestically who are working with children. And so spending some time there, I was able to do just a number of different projects with practical, substantive field work, really exercising community-based solutions. And that's where I learned so much, right? And that helps inform my policy now. And further, during my time at Arizona State University, I was really able to take everything I had learned, right? All the things that I thought were working well, and to build a comprehensive model to combat trafficking in the United States and to talk to stakeholders across the country. We interviewed folks from rural, urban, suburban areas and asked them, what are the gaps in addressing human trafficking in your communities? And along the way, we found some things that were working well. So I think there's been just multi-steps in this work, but what I have found is I haven't been able to shortcut anything. Maybe it's just my personality, but I really am so grateful that I had time in the field that helps inform my policy work now. And daily, I'm still remembering the faces and the voices of survivors that I have worked with. And that is like forefront for me in this work. It
Right.
just to fuel me.
Yeah, and I'm sure it keeps you really, it helps you keep the priorities, right, on the survivors and preventing more victims. So share with us, what are the priorities that you have right now in your role and the focus of the federal government? Let's start with that, and then we could go a little bit deeper in terms of what are the different roles and responsibilities of the different layers of government and what people can do.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned prevention. That's a really good one. Right now, we're very focused on prevention education, other prevention efforts, including ways to prevent goods produced by forced labor from coming into the U.S. supply chain. So we have been, rightfully so, very focused on prosecution and protection efforts in the United States since the passage of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. So we're 20 years in on that track. And some of the work that I've been working on the past 3 years really is shifting to the prevention space. So going upstream and saying, how do we stop this from happening? And listening to the voices of survivors who have said, if only I had known this could be a trafficking experience, and really thinking through how we build resiliency skills before a trafficking experience, build knowledge so people know who to turn to in a potentially dangerous situation, right? You know, Shelley was talking earlier about all children digitally learning right now. We're very concerned and cognizant of that right now. We're working closely with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. We want to continue to get these programs that are widely available and free out to parents, caregivers, concerned citizens, and children so that they can keep themselves safe online and not be lured and groomed into either child exploitation or human trafficking. And so I think we recognize right now it is all hands on deck, and it's going to take us addressing all of these P's, as we call them, in the paradigm to really make the difference, but that we recognize the trafficking prevention space is the next frontier of this work. We will continue marching on in prosecutions and protection that will never stop, but we really have to get strategic and go upstream in the prevention space.
Yeah, and I think, that's the brief outlines like some resources that people can use that are available on the Department of State website, as well as HHS, and then other like many NGOs that are local. There's also something that's really that's disturbing, is the role of big tech, and the brief talks a little bit about that. But there's some initiative to really hold some of the website providers and platforms accountable, liable for the trafficking of humans, for sex trafficking, but also for labor, forced labor. And that's a whole other area, where the federal government could play a role. It'd be great if you talked about the roles and responsibilities at the federal level, and then at the state level or local, and then private and community. What do you see based on your experience and currently in your role in DC?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it takes all levels of government and also public-private partnership and also community-based work to make this a reality. So we really see ourselves here as policy setters. In some ways, we are writing the blueprint that we are hoping states will take a page from, and even local governments, and not just adopt some of the things that we think are working, but to contextualize it to their own community, right? Because what works on the northern border of New York and the Akwesasne Reservation is not the same thing that is going to work in Houston, Texas, right? There are some things that we can share as best practices as a good framework, but I think it's always going to take the local experts who know their area, who know where trafficking is happening, to be able to make that difference, really. So we see ourselves clearly as grant makers. I think you probably saw yesterday that we just issued another $100 million for local task force work. So that is one role that the US government plays, is we're directly funding boots on the ground providers and law enforcement so that they can do this community-based work. Another way in which we think that we can be helpful is sharing subject matter expertise. So we have various training and technical assistance centers. We're really trying to bring us all to a place of evidence-based, and once we are there, then we can continue to infuse that training and expertise on the local level. So there's some unique parts that we have to play here in the federal government, but man, we have some fantastic stakeholders on the state level too that I have the privilege of working with. And then I think a good example is state of Florida. They've really just taken the lead on prevention education, K through 12 initiative, and they've worked really closely with Miami-Dade School District in advance of that to get prevention education fully rooted in. So that's one great example of where we had this national framework, we hosted a roundtable, we talked to the folks on the state level, and then really it took the school board and the community members saying, we're doing this and we're rooting it in and we're talking to our young people. So it's really encouraging when that happens.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, right. Those were really, it's a great highlight, and how it really needs to be, this education needs to start like so young. And I think there's also other initiatives of even making everyone aware of that you could be contributing to, you can have a trafficking footprint either in what you consume, because there's labor trafficking, and maybe you could talk a little bit about that. We always think of child trafficking, but another area is this modern day slavery that is another area that we need to pay attention to, and I know you're spending time on, right?
We do, and thank you for raising it, because I'm spending at least 50% of my time on addressing forced labor in our supply chains, and rightfully so. We, as the US government, are uniquely suited to prevent goods made by labor trafficking happening overseas from coming into the United States. So Tariff Act 230 says that if there's reasonable suspicion that a good, whether it be clothing, textiles, any type of rubber gloves, are some more recent ones that we've prevented from coming to the US supply chain. If it's made by labor trafficking, we're saying we're not letting it come into our shores. And I think we're using our purchasing dollar to really make a statement there. That's a value statement. And so we have been asking our colleagues at Department of Homeland Security in particular Customs Border Protection, to really ramp up their trade efforts to prevent these goods from coming into the US supply chain, and also to investigate it as well with our partners at Homeland Security Investigations and Department of Justice. So I'm really pleased because I know that the US government is really taking a stand, and we're asking our other country partners to do the same, to consider these types of remedies that they might have that they can avail to themselves. But I couldn't be more proud of the work that we're doing, because I think it would only take one trip to a factory for all of us to see firsthand how people are languishing in slave labor to know that this is for sure the right way to go.
Yeah, and what is I think we have here about the worth of someone being trafficked, labor trafficking and sex trafficking. So I think it would be great if you gave us, some real advice. And well, two things. One is, what else can the private sector do? And you talked about like Homeland Security being involved and the agencies being involved. What can the private sector do in terms of helping and protecting survivors, but also prevention and even in prosecution? I think it'd be great if you touched on that.
Sure. I mean, there's so many things. So where to start trying to think. So on the tech side, we have been so grateful to the corporate folks who are really helping us uncover incidents of human trafficking or online exploitation. So they have tools and resources that they will pair up with the federal government to help law enforcement do their job better. It is a full-time job, and even if you were an analyst looking all day trying to find human trafficking, you still might not find it. So they are a force multiplier for us there. Also, they do a lot of training in spaces that we just can't get into. So hospitality industry, airlines, truck stops, you name it. I think, there's been a real strengthening of that public-private partnership to help empower communities to recognize the indicators of human trafficking, to make a call, and to train their frontline staff to recognize and be in a position where we can't be in some time. So we're very grateful to them for that effort. On the prevention side, I think the supply chain is really where we would welcome more partnership from the corporate world to take a really deep dive into their suppliers and where they're securing their goods from, and from that perspective, do some deep digging just to make sure that they don't have any slavery in their supply chain. And we've seen some really good actors who are doing that. And I know in particular, we're also seeing corporations take a look at, seafood, clothing. There's just so many different items, but we're really excited about that part, because I think it's going to take not just the public-private partnership, but then also us using our purchasing dollars to go back to corporations and saying, I want to know for sure that if I'm buying a pair of jeans that there's no forced labor, and I'm willing to pay a couple of bucks more to do it, right? Or like a penny more per pound to get strawberries that aren't picked by forced labor or labor trafficking. So I think those are all things that can be done, and even what our own contribution is here.
Right. There's such a huge awareness effort that needs to happen, in each of us really speaking up and asking questions and interacting. I know, like, one of the things is also and one of the aspects of the brief that we highlight is, to ask your local representative, whether it is even in your city, in your town, with your law enforcement officers, to find out what are they doing, what's going on in your community to combat trafficking or to build awareness, and then even your state representative, what's their views, and even at Congress, because Congress and the Senate are proposing different legislation to combat demand, right, as well as ease prosecution and help survivors. So one last question, we're almost going to be wrapping up, but I'd love your advice to someone who wants to take ownership and engage on the issue of human trafficking in their communities and beyond. What would be your final words of advice to be impactful?
Yeah, well, first of all, read the policy brief that you all prepared. I mean, that's a really great place to start. Become a learner in the space, reach out to your local nonprofit, to your task force, ask how you can be of service. I think there's a number of NGOs who put together volunteer teams that go out into the community that really are force multipliers. And I think what you suggested just now, which is to reach out to your representatives. This is a very bipartisan issue, and we intend to always keep it that way. I think it's hugely important and that constituents reach out to their representatives. And I think we've really seen a big sea change over the past 10 years because of that grassroots movement where people continually reached out and said, this is something that's really important to me. And so I'm so grateful to everyone on this call and also to our leaders who are making sure that this really stays on the radar. And I think I'm cognizant here being in Washington, D.C., more people are talking about human trafficking today than ever before. I've never seen anything like it, and I'm so greatly encouraged, so much support. And I think I may have mentioned this to you before, Sylvie, but like in the beginning of this work when I was doing it, it was like, I would mention the word human trafficking, people would just kind of slowly back away.
You're like, no, not me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you think it's happening in India and Cambodia, and that's what's really, really scary is there's so many examples, sadly, just recently, I think you were pointing out that US Marshals rescued 40 children in Georgia, in Atlanta. So, yeah.
It's fantastic. And I think really just having a posture of leaning in. And this is a dark issue. I resonate with that as well. But I think it takes people to be thin-skinned enough to care to make the difference. And what I've learned by engaging in this work is that though the trafficking experience is dark and paralyzing, by engaging, I've been able to see survivors go on to do amazing things that they would have never dreamed for themselves because people gave them the resources and the support to do it. And I've seen it when it's absent as well. And it's one of the most tragic things, but people are very resilient. And I think that it's not a fairy tale ending. It's not sunshine and rainbows when you go into a survivor care program. But recovery and resiliency is possible, and that's the rest of the story. And so I'm so glad that I jumped into this space. I'm so grateful for everyone rallying around us today and in this work who want to know more, because I think that's really going to help make the difference.
Well, thank you, Heather. It's been really great to meet you, and thank you for the work that you do and inspiring others to really have an impact in this space. So thank you.
My privilege to serve, and thank you so much, Sylvie, for hosting.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Heather. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time that we have today. And so again, thank you for sharing your expertise. And I think the next step is really on everyone here there's a real call to action. I invite you to review the brief, read the brief on human trafficking. We want you to circle up. This is an opportunity for you to convene your friends, family members, husbands, men. This is not just a women's issue. This is a whole community issue. And this is an opportunity for you to engage on. So circle up. And thank you for joining us. And I want to make sure that you take note of our next event, which is going to be on understanding law enforcement and policing in America. And it's going to be September 30th at noon. So I'm really looking forward to it. So thank you again for joining. And thank you, Shelley from New Friends, New Life, for being part of this, and Women's Leadership Live for promoting this event. So it's been really great. So thank you so much.